But at one point, they held an intervention for me. So they had some people who were like, "You're just, you're not doing the things you should be doing. What you should do." And some people who I thought were friends, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go," and then there's guys that were going out to eat, and I end up at the pastor's house, and they're having this intervention, and he says, "Do you know what your problems are about?"
The proceeds of this monetized episode are going towards I Am Dying Out Loud. Find out more in the description. Marie, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I am absolutely fascinated to hear your story. For those listening, you actually filled out my guest form that I put on a group on social media. I won't say which one, but I put the form on a lot of groups on social media, and you reached out, and I thought that your story was just what I even know about it, and I don't even know that much about it. It's just a wild story in the research that I've done on your background. But enough from me. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the background that we're going to be covering today.
Okay. So I grew up one of 8 kids. I grew up in Ohio. And what I understand is that we were actually Catholic till I was about 4. And there's something something that disillusioned my father about the Catholic Church. And what I have understood is he had 2 brothers who were priests, and they both fell out of the priesthood at some point, or just made the decision to leave on their own. And I think that really shook his faith. So he went searching for something, and he heard, Herbert W. Armstrong, Radio Church of God, this really dynamic man with a big, powerful voice. And my dad was always very well read. So there was something about the way that Mr. Armstrong was presenting this material that really got my dad interested. I think my dad also had a very big ego. And so when he initially did some outreach at the time, you had to be interviewed by one of the traveling evangelists, and then you had to be invited to attend church. And so,
really,
yeah, so he made it through the interview round, and he got invited to go to a local congregation. And so I think that really played to his sense of ego, and he really liked the structure. Yeah, it was crazy. And so he, gave up everything. My oldest brother, and I don't talk to any of them anymore, but my oldest brother, at one point, I remember he was about 12 when they left. And he said, "I remember us being like a happy Catholic family. Like, we played Little League and we did all of these things." And, within the span of a couple of months, like, all of that changed. So I wasn't exposed, or that shift wasn't as big for me as it was for him, and my older siblings.
Yeah.
But for them, it was really pretty impactful. And then there are all these rules and regulations, and all of a sudden, like, you can't do anything on Saturday. That's the Sabbath. So from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And I even remember, like, growing up, like, here's how bad it was. I shouldn't say bad. Like, we would get the Sunday paper. Well, they would always deliver it on Saturday, the day before. We were not allowed to open the Sunday paper until sundown on Saturday night. We're not, because it was would be enjoyable for us to read the comics in color. I mean, it was just my dad. So he took everything just to that nth degree. It was, when like the Day of Atonement was one of the holy days, all of a sudden we had to fast. I was like 5, and I'm supposed to go without food and water for a day. I'm like, why? I don't understand this. I had no explanation. So it was really interesting. So my older siblings, recall it was more of an immediate shift, probably harder for them. So for me, mostly I grew up that way. But it was not we weren't a very happy household. We just,
I was going to say, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun in general. And this was at the time, was it known as Worldwide Church of God at that point? Okay.
Yeah. So I left when it was still Worldwide Church of God. So so I was, let's see. So I grew up in there. So I remember, so I'm 6 in the line of 8. And so I have a younger brother and then my mom, right around the time the changes happened, she got pregnant with my youngest brother. He was born blind, and yeah, and there were some handicaps around him. At the time, there was no definition for autism. Back then, like 50 some years ago, you were automatically retarded.
Yep.
And because he was the eighth out of, he's eighth, and my dad, he just took it to a level where he told my mom, "You must have sinned, and this is why your son was born this way. You sinned." And so he just put all of that on her, that she was some big sinner, right? So he just took it to that level because, if you sin. And so it just, she had postpartum depression. And here I'm like a 4 or 5 year old kid.
Yeah.
And we're all helping to care for this special needs kid. Like, we're barely kids ourselves, but we're like helping to change a diaper. I'm like changing his diaper. We're, teaching him how to walk. We're teaching him how to do things. And no, it was a challenge. So my dad just really took it to that level. He became just very just bitter and angry. He just, but yeah, so it was really harsh. And I mean, he was, heavy-handed with the belt. If one of us did something wrong, we all did. So, there were those things and the beliefs. And I didn't know what I believed at the time. I was a kid. I grew up, I went to church. We sat for 2 hours. Nothing made sense to me. I just, as a kid growing up, even, I kind of half listened, didn't know that I believed anything or not. I was like, oh, I'm just going to go with it because you had to honor your mother and father. So yeah, it was very interesting, challenging, but yeah, he just,
and was he always like that, or was it after he converted?
I don't remember really anything up until the time I was 4. I mean, I have some pictures of me when I was 4, when we were Catholic, and we were all like happy and smiling and that kind of thing. But I have, pictures from when I was growing up where I'm not a smiley kid. I was always in fight or flight mode because there was a sudden anger. So always this fight or flight mode. But yeah, he was just such a, an ass. So as I got, older and, started trying to voice some things, I always wondered about, my brother being blind and, going to school, I'm like, hey, like they have these things, like there's like surgery they could do to remove cataracts, and why aren't we trying to get him? Because maybe if Sam could actually see, it might help his learning curve. And, oh God, no. If God wanted him to see, God will heal. I mean, he was anointed, I don't know how many times with anointing cloths and, and all that. If God wanted him to see, he would see. And
which is wild because you're like, so which is it? Is he like this because of sin? Or is he like this because God intended for him to be this way and he never makes a mistake,
My mom sinned. He was born this way. So if God wanted him to see, though, because of my mom's sin, there's the scripture that says, he'll remove the scales from the eyes, and God will remove the scales from his eyes. So, I'm in school and, we go in health classes and, I remember there was, talking about, medicine. And I said, hey, why don't we get surgery? Like there's cataract surgery. And nope. If God wants him to see, he'll see. And I said, so I had to be flippin' smart because I was the flippin' smart one. And I said, why wouldn't you think that God inspired these surgeons to learn how to remove cataracts, and then that would be the way that Sam would see and to remove the scales? Oh my God.
That's a great question.
I did too. He did not. The belt came off. I got, whipped up with that because how dare I question God and how dare I question my father? So yeah, he was a bit of a tyrant about that. Yeah.
It's wild too, because I remember having that same question too. It's like that story where the man is dying of thirst on the side of the road and somebody comes by and they're like, can I get you a drink? And he's like, no, God will provide. Second person comes by. Do you need something to drink? No, God will provide. Then he dies and God's like, why did you die? And he's like, because I was waiting for you to provide. And God's like, I sent you 2 people with water. Like I feel that way about doctors. It's like, why is it that so many, especially Christian religions, are like, no vaccines, no this, no surgery, some of them no blood transfusions, nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is it so hard to believe that God would have created doctors and like put these ideas in doctors' minds? I don't understand why that's never an option.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, hi, God created. I mean, people have survived. It was just really bizarre. And I remember my oldest brother, he had, I can't remember. I want to say it was encephalitis, where you get the kind of an infection in your spine or something. He ended up in the hospital. And I still didn't really understand it. And I was like, hey, like what happened? Like, why is my brother in the hospital? And my dad didn't want to say he had encephalitis. He told people at church, well, he's been possessed by the devil. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? So he had just these weird, he just took it to this level where we're like, it was just so bizarre. But yeah, he's possessed by the devil. I was like, what? So yeah, and that's what he told people. And
that's wild. You would think that like, even if he thought he was possessed by the devil, you'd think he would not want people to know that. He'd be like, no, he has encephalitis. Like
that's because when he got healed, then the devil was cast out and God healed him, right? So then he could go and he could say that God healed him. So yeah, it was interesting. So there was the whole medical thing, and getting, like you have to go get anointed, and like my mom was a little bit more, she grew up in a family that was really more, for her growing up, progressive. She went to really good schools. She graduated from college. She had a degree in mathematics from college. I mean, she's actually a very smart woman.
How did they meet? How they just seem like.
So at the time, she was working for Rockwell International in Columbus. My dad had gotten out of the Navy, and she was Catholic, and she was going to the parish that his brother, my uncle, was overseeing. And then, his younger brother comes home from the Navy. So he's like, oh, well, let's introduce them. So they got set up. And, my mom, at the time was like, oh, women should get married and have kids. My dad had a different plan. He wanted to marry a smart woman, which was my mom, and have her support him so he could go to college and get a degree. So they obviously didn't communicate very well. So, them being Catholic, she gets pregnant, starts pumping out kids. So it was always a challenge. And then she just fell right in line behind him. She never questioned him. She just fell right in line behind him. So anything he did, she just did. If we got, whipped with the belt, or anything like that, she'd always be like, well, I don't know what you did to upset your dad. So, yeah, it's like, well, I don't know what you did. So yeah, it was just really interesting. So there was, we always heard growing up in the church, the Bible is not open for private interpretation. And I think my dad did take some he took some of it literally, like it's not, but he would just very letter of the law, right? Very, very much letter of the law. I don't know where his thought process was. I really don't know. It was so bizarre. Right. I'm like, how did you end up here? But he did. And, it was so funny because, so when he quit the Catholic Church, his mother disowned him. She wouldn't talk to him for a really long time, but he would dutifully take us. She was living in an old folks home. He would dutifully take us to go visit her so she could see her grandkids, and she would barely acknowledge him. She talked to us, and eventually she started losing up, but several years. So as we go through all of these things, and as worldwide started changing while I was in college, they disowned me. So it's kind of like, it's kind of a family thing. We just disown people because they don't believe the way we do. It's genetic, yeah. So it's a challenge, yeah.
Did your dad serve in wartime while he was in?
He was in the Korean War.
Do you think maybe that's where like his kind of like unhinged rage comes from? Like maybe untreated PTSD from war?
Possibly. So when he was growing up, family history, his parents were, straight off the boat from Italy. And his father was several years older than my grandmother. And, they were poor. And what I understand is my grandfather was a metallurgist, and he was very good at that. And so it was also around kind of the end of Prohibition and all that time. And so he would go and he would fix stills that he didn't speak English. So they would say, hey, come fix stills for us. Throw a bag over his head, drive him off. Grandma would be like, yeah, anytime, pick him up, throw him, he'd go fix stills, come home with some money. There'd be a ham and potatoes or whatever. And the few times she tried to question him, I guess he was a bit abusive to her. I don't know how much, but I think my dad, there was a time or two where he had to stop his father from, beating on his mother. So I think that's part of it. I think there's part of it. I'm not sure, what happened in the Navy. He was a very good looking man, very, young, good looking. And here he's on a warship with these grizzled old veterans. So I can only imagine there's probably some hazing and that kind of thing. Yeah. I think, his sister was very musically inclined. And I don't know that he necessarily had the same path. He had two brothers who went into the priesthood, another brother who was pretty much older than him. So he didn't really know him as well. So he kind of was the one who left to take care of some of the family things.
Yeah.
So there's probably some bitterness. So he didn't really get to live out his dreams. And I think the fact that he had thought coming out of the Navy, I'll marry this smart woman, she'll support me while I go to college, and that didn't happen, I don't think that helped. I think that just added to his frustration that I'm not achieving the things I want to achieve in life.
It sounds like a lot of, oh no, the consequences of my actions. Like, oh no.
Yeah.
Interesting. I feel like that's also a very common story that we hear is a father making decisions and then blaming the mom and the kids for him making those decisions. And you're just like, I
Well,
mean,
they didn't
you would do
communicate
it
very
too.
well. They didn't communicate the plan very well. Like, he
Yeah.
didn't say, hey, like, are you okay if we do this? And could you work for 4 more years while I go to school? That conversation never happened.
Interesting.
And she's like, oh, hey, somebody wants to marry me, I want to have kids right away because that's what I'm supposed to be doing in this era. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge. It was an interesting story because my mom was really smart. I will say, the one thing my mom did for us, and again, when both my parents passed away, I was like, I just really didn't care. My mom, I think I saw where she tried, and I don't think she tried hard enough. I think she could have tried harder than she did.
Totally.
I remember that Judge Judy? She wrote that book, The 10 Stupid Things Women Do. And the last thing she wrote in there is they don't protect their babies. And I was like, you never protected us. She just always let dad do that thing. And so I always that's where I had the respect. But, she would sew and cook and she would do all those things. But the one thing she did do is she moved us into a really good neighborhood. So we it was almost 100% Jewish community. So, so it was, and a great education system. I mean, I think we were all really smart kids. We all really had high GPAs, athletic, all of us. But we were the weird kids because we weren't Jewish, but we kept all the Jewish holidays. So that was also like really weird. Sometimes we kept the Jewish holidays better than some of the Jewish kids, like one of my friends. So on the Day of Atonement, like here, we're fasting. We had to take the day off of school. We're fasting. We had to go sit in like 4 hours of church services. And she's like, oh, my parents said that I could eat if I went to school, but if I chose not to go to school, I'd have to fast. So I just decided to go to school so I could eat. It's like, okay. But, they were very serious about that. So we'd have to go to all the high holy days. Like I didn't get to go to my high school graduation because it fell on one of the high holy days. So I didn't get to go to my high school graduation. I had to go to like the school the next day and pick up my diploma.
Wow.
I mean, so it was just kind of that, that kind of stuff,
Do you think it was more of like, for your dad, do you think he actually believed in the teachings of the church? Or do you think he just saw it as like a method of control, like more control over everybody?
No, he believed it. But it also the control because the Bible said, you respect
like it didn't hurt also that it was controlled.
Yes, that it was so strict and the boundaries were so strict, which was always really hard because in the congregation I grew up, I would see the various levels of parenting where they'd be like, oh yeah, you can go out on Friday night. You can go to your high school football game on a Friday night. Like I never got to go. I mean, I snuck out once or twice, but I never got to go. Where my parents said, oh yeah, go ahead, go out. Oh, you can go to your prom. No, you can't go to because you'll get pregnant at the prom because apparently everybody gets pregnant at prom. I didn't know that. But
I didn't either. I missed that memo.
Yeah. Apparently. I'm like, oh, how did that happen? Good thing I didn't go to prom.
Do you think your mom actually believed it, or do you think she was just doing what your dad said because that's what her job was?
I don't. That's a great question. I my heart of hearts, I don't think she actually really believed it. I think because though she was the wife and had the kids and she was to be submissive, I think she always believed in the submissive thing. She just did it.
It's almost like the nice Catholic girl in her made her be the ideal worldwide Church of God wife.
Although they did not have a happy marriage. They did not at all. They were not happy. But, and she was, so we'd go to the congregation, we'd go to church and, I'd see all these but there was, it was like a caste system. We were, low end on the caste. And there were others who were the deacons and elders, and their kids were the ones that got away with the stuff, and we didn't. And, so it was just all really kind of it was just kind of just a weird dynamic in the church. But my dad, he'd spend hours and hours after church talking to people about prophecy and this. So when you ask if he really believed, I mean, he would go through newspapers and he would clip out articles of everything that was prophetic and the end time. And he would send these envelopes of newspapers to headquarters. And he's like, envelope, here's all these articles. Here's the prophecy coming. And he would just, it was really bizarre. So going to college, so, he's doing this years and years and years, go to college. I remember my sister saying, because she went to college at Pasadena, at the Ambassador campus in Pasadena. And they were like, oh, you're the daughter of the guy who sends us envelopes full of articles of prophecy things, right? So he had this reputation. So people were certainly flagged at headquarters for these weird.
He was so into it that even the headquarters were like, this dude is a bit unhinged.
Oh, wow. We were talking envelopes of articles, just shoo. Oh yeah, it was crazy. Wow. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, it was really interesting. And so, he was very well read. I have to say, for as much of a prick as he was, I have a really good work ethic from him because he always worked really hard and he loved reading. And so, so I learned those things from him. I just didn't like reading the same things that, he liked. But it was a really interesting, it was just interesting. So there's part of me that kind of feels bad because I don't know what happened to him that made him that way. So you feel kind of bad, but then I'm also like, you're an adult, fucking figure it out.
But also like,
TV or,
but also just that I feel like that whole generation just there's 150 million things it could have been. They had asbestos in the house. They had lead in the paint. They had war. They had, emotional detachment from their own parents. They had we could go on all day.
Therapy wasn't a thing. Oh my God, you were totally crazy if you did therapy.
Yeah. And so for you personally, growing up, how old were you when you started to be like, I don't know about all this. Like, this seems like I don't really want to be involved.
I think it was when I was in college. So when I was in high school, I didn't apply for any other college, but Ambassador College, because there was no consideration. It was that you go to Ambassador College. Actually, I had this fascination when I was a teenager with the military. I wanted to be a Marine so bad. I don't know why, probably because I watched John Wayne movies. I don't know, whatever it was, but I wanted to be a Marine. I was so fascinated with that branch of the military.
Interesting.
And but we were conscientious objectors by the religious affiliation. I didn't even know what that was. But, my brothers, my dad all had them registered as conscientious. So in case there was any kind of draft, they couldn't be drafted. And, I had no idea I didn't know I objected to it, but I thought it was really fascinating. But it was, go to the college. So then it became a little bit competitive to get into the college because only the cream of the crop gets to go to Ambassador College.
And that is a feeder college from Worldwide Church of God, right?
Yes. So that was sponsored. There was a campus they had campus in Big Sandy, Texas. They had one in Pasadena. They used to have one in Bricketwood, England. They had a couple of campuses, but it was like, you were the cream of the crop, to apply. So I got accepted to go to the Big Sandy campus.
Wow.
Which was probably best for me because it was out in the country. It was a little more rural. Had I gone to Pasadena, I never would have made it because I'm not highbrow. My sister started at Pasadena and she was so much better than everybody. And that just wasn't me. So I went to Big Sandy, made some, great friends there. And it was a little bit more relaxed. And, but when I was a sophomore is when the split happened and the Gerald Fleury split off and people started splitting. Well, so at college, they started to get slightly more liberal. Like they said, hey, we've done a review and we used to not be able to wear makeup. And we think women can wear makeup now. We think it's okay to wear makeup. Right. That was a big thing. So and even to this day, I still don't wear a ton of makeup, but we're allowed to wear makeup. Great. We'll wear makeup. And my dad
and
was
for people who for people who aren't familiar, there was a point where the leadership of the Worldwide Church of God became fractured, right? And wasn't it that the main leader passed away and his son was the one who didn't want to continue things?
Well, so when Herbert W. Armstrong passed away, there was a split between him and Garner Ted, and then Joseph W. Tkach was named as the next apostle. But he started loosening some things up when I was in college. So it used to be like, you couldn't interracially date. And they're like, oh, we don't see a problem with that. So I was like, that's great. I'm going to date every African-American guy that's out there. Right. Yeah. The makeup thing was huge. So they did.
What did your dad think about that?
Well, I mean, at home, we weren't allowed to wear makeup because we weren't allowed to wear it at home. Right. So, but that was going liberal because only whores wore makeup. If you're a
Right.
painted whore, because the Bible references, the painted women. So you were a
It
painted
does.
whore. So, yeah. Funny thing is, I'm at college, and all of a sudden, you're not beautiful unless you wear makeup, and no man's going to want to be with you unless you wear makeup. I'm like, what? So it's just this whole thing. But I'm cream of the crop at college because I'm at the college where God placed his name. So I'm cream of the crop. And so you're feeling pretty good about that. But I was still in the caste system, low end, because I was the daughter of that weird guy who sent envelopes of articles. Then when he split, so when the flurry thing happened, my dad didn't like the fact that Worldwide had gotten slightly liberal. He went with Flurry because he was very much, I'm going to follow this. And so I stayed. I elected to stay, and that's when they disowned me. So then I was also now this dissidence kid. So not only was I that weird, right, I was this dissidence kid. And so I had this extra label on me, and I was under much more scrutiny because of that. And I always thought, if it had been Herbert W. Armstrong around then, he would have spun it in some great advertising way where he would have said, oh my God, look at the faith of this person sticking with us when all these other sinners are leaving. Oh no, they were like, oh, watch her. She's going to do something. She's going to be nefarious or whatever. I was going to try to undermine from the inside out. It was just really bizarre.
You would think that they would be happy that you weren't connected to the envelope newspaper guy anymore, and they would embrace you.
Marketing opportunity that they missed, right? They missed this marketing opportunity. So that was just really interesting. But you still went through the motions. But I think it was probably even my freshman year. I'm like, I really don't believe this. I got a degree in theology because I needed to buy one book, and that was a Bible. So it was a cheap degree to get.
That's great.
But I got to where I didn't really believe it. I mean, I barely passed. I kept like a C average. But I made really great friends. But I knew if I left at any point in the middle of college that there was at least a support structure there. So if I knew I'd left, especially that my parents had disowned me, it wasn't going to go well. So I stuck it out. And it was, but it was rough. It was rough, but I had a lot of really good friends who, backed and rallied around me. But there was, again, that same caste system because you had the people who came whose, parents worked at Pasadena and the headquarters, and, there were ministers and pastors' kids, and, here I was now a dissident's kid. So it was, that was a challenge in and of itself. Then, like the whole dating thing was rough because then nobody really wanted to be saddled with the dissidents because we were all being trained to be ministers' wives. But I wasn't going to be a good minister's wife because I was told I wasn't pretty because I didn't wear makeup even when I was allowed to. I had too much of a mouth on me. And I was just too outspoken. So it was crazy. I got kicked out of women's club.
What? That's wild.
Yeah, but I was like, so I was in college, but my freshman year, like everybody was rushing to get baptized. And I was like, well, I guess I should, probably think about getting baptized. So I signed up to do counseling sessions.
Why then? Why were they all suddenly wanting to get baptized? Was that like a new thing introduced by the split?
No, it was just, that was just thing you do. You went to college, then you should be really serious about this and you should be working to get baptized.
Interesting.
Right? So I counseled with one of the ministers, and I was like, I did like 5 counseling sessions. And I said, well, I guess I feel like I'm ready to get baptized. And he's like, well, thank God. I didn't know how much longer I was going to, because I thought you were ready after the first one. I think they were trying to achieve numbers. I'm like, oh my God, okay, whatever. So I go and I get baptized, and then I'm expected to pay tithes because I'm baptized. So silly me. Now I have to pay 10% of my $4 an hour I made at college.
So you have to earn baptism and then you have to pay basically a subscription membership fee to stay baptized.
Well, you pay your 10%. So once you're baptized, you're obligated to pay 10% because the Bible has first tithe and second tithe, and then every third year, a third tithe, right? So, so once you're baptized, because you're a member, you're obligated to pay. It's like, here's, this is what you do. So that was all kind of weird. So you go through that whole thing. So I get out of college. And I'm like, well, I'm going to, I guess move to a local congregation. But I couldn't go back home because that's where my parents were. I was disowned. So I had some friends at the time. They're like, hey, come to Oregon. We'll find a place for you. We'll find, So they put out an announcement at their local congregation. Hey, there's, a gal from college. She's a graduate, and she, she needs a place to stay. and, until she can get on her feet. And so, this church family is like, oh, I'll come, we'll stay. So once you move out of the college, like where you're cream of the crop and you can do anything, suddenly you're not cream of the crop anymore. They're like, hey, we need somebody to coach, youth volleyball. Great, I played volleyball. I'll coach. The boys team needs a coach. Oh, you can't, you're a female. Can't coach the boys volleyball. Nope, you're a female. Okay. Dating was horrible. You could only date inside the church. Well, there's like 3 single guys at the time. I'm like, oh my God. And then the other congregations weren't really close enough to date anybody. So there was that whole stigma. So I remember I started, as I was working, I met just people outside of work. I'm like, I need to meet some new people. And they're like, yeah, come out. So I go out and I started going, oh, ladies' night. Like they have ladies' night at bars. Like on a Thursday, I go to ladies' night. I'm meeting some nice guys, dating. And oh my God, I'm in trouble. And I shouldn't be dating outside the church. And that was horrible. And I'm like, okay, but there's this one guy. And he and I were friends. I tried dating him and it just wouldn't work out. He was a taxidermist and didn't talk. And I was like, okay, but nice enough guy. But he was not college educated and he was dating a divorcee, not in the church, with kids. Whoa. And I said, so he's doing this, but I can't make a decision. Well, he's a man. I'm like, hold on a second. Like a year ago, I was cream of the crop. And I was like highly educated. I was answering Watts lines and converting people over the phone from the New Mexico State Prison, by the way. So they always had the females answer Watts lines on New Mexico State Prison Day. But, but I'm like, I was doing all of the front line of God's work. And all of a sudden, I am stupid. I can't make a decision. I can't coach boys volleyball because I'm a female. Yeah, and he can date a divorcee with kids who's not in the church, but I can't date outside the church. So suddenly, I'm like, what happened to me? It was really bizarre. It was just such a bizarre change. Yeah, it was crazy. So went through that. Still not really anybody to date. And so I thought, okay, you're not going to let me coach boys volleyball. I'll find some other way to coach. So I started coaching Special Olympics. And I'll coach because the Bible says we're supposed to set a good example, go out in the world and do good works. Yeah, I was told that I shouldn't. I should be volunteering inside the church. I said, I don't get it. I said, I've offered to coach volleyball and you won't let me coach volleyball. I was like, well, they need help in the mother's room. I'm like, I'm not going to go baby somebody else. I'm going to mother somebody else's kid.
Like, do I look like a mother?
I'm not a wet nurse. I mean, so yeah, it was just really crazy. So
that's wild. Like they wouldn't let you coach Special Olympics. Arguably,
I did it anyway. I was named State Coach of the Year in like 1997.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but they were like, no. I said, no, we're supposed to let our light shine in the world.
Yeah, that's like the one place you think they would want their ministry to be is somewhere like that.
Yeah. It was just, it was so crazy. So
they probably would have if a man had asked to do it. Then it would have been like, oh yes, please go shine your light all over.
Yeah, go shine your light. Yeah, it was crazy. So that was, let's see. So
wow,
I was probably about 26, and I started to really make the shift away. And so I was like, screw this. I'm going to go out on ladies' night and I'm going to go out on Friday night, which is the Sabbath. And I was going, I met just friends outside of the church. And, but I did get to coach girls volleyball, just so you know. I was allowed to coach girls volleyball. And during the time, I'm coaching girls volleyball. So when I quit tithing, I got out of college, I just quit tithing. I was like, screw this. I'm not going to tithe anymore.
Do they keep track of that stuff? Like, is there somebody whose job it is to keep track of that?
Oh, they do. So the funny thing is, the tithe was there to help the widows and orphans, so the people who were in need. So I had coached volleyball, and there was this one young girl who she'd gotten pregnant. She was like a junior in high school. She'd gotten pregnant, and she had the baby because they didn't believe in abortion. She wasn't going to give the baby up for adoption. So it was just.
And she was in the church.
She was in the church. Yep, she was in the church. And there's another. I'll have to go back to a story when I was in, before college. But yes, she was in the church, and but it was like really embarrassing for her because like she would need money, and she would have to go and say like, hey, "Can you guys help me? I need some support. Tithe assistance." And they would grill her, like, what do you need? What do you need the money for? What's it going to go for? And, she'd be like, well, like, here's like the list. Like, I need some feminine products. And they're like, what? You want tampons? We'll buy you pads, but not tampons, because that's like having sex. And she's like, oh my God, it's like I've already had sex, I'm pregnant, right? But it was so humiliating for her to have to go ask, because she had to like itemize, everything she needed. So I was like, okay, here's my tithe money. I would just give her the cash. I go, here. I'm not going to feed it to the system and have somebody get humiliated to have to get this money that's supposed to help. I'm just going to give it to you direct. Wow. I mean, here's $30. Go get, if you need whatever, groceries or whatever, here's $30. I gave you what I can. But yeah, that was the part that was so humiliating. So the tithe part was, so as I was getting more and more disillusioned, I was like, this just sucks. I just can't do this anymore. And so I kind of, I was showing up at church on Saturdays hungover. And I remember showing up one day, I was hungover. I had a tattoo on my ass. I just gotten a fresh tattoo. I show up and the minister comes up and he's like, I am so glad you're here today because my sermon is just for you. I was like, fuck this. And I got up and I walked out. I said, fuck this. I'm out. And I walked out. And that was the last time I went to church. They tried calling me a few times after, like, even, we just want to let you know there's a snow day, we're not coming to church. I'm like, yeah, I don't attend anymore, right? But at one point, they held an intervention for me. So they had some people who were like, you're just, you're not doing the things you should be doing what you should do. And some people who I thought were friends, and they're like, oh, we're going to go. And then there's guys that were going out to eat, and I end up at the pastor's house, and they're having this intervention. And he says, do you know what your problems are about? He said, you're not tithing. And so when he said, do they check? So because you have special envelopes, you mail them in on, they're labeled with your name, and you write how much your community, you mail them in. Yeah.
So it's not like a pass the plate thing. It's like you literally pay your dues.
They pass the plate, but you have envelopes, you mail them straight to headquarters, right? So they're like, oh yeah, they haven't received envelopes from you in years. So that's your problem. You're not tithing. And so this is why you're in this state that you're in. No doubt that it's like the state of confusion. Like 3 years ago, I was cream of the crop and now I'm curdled milk. Like what happened? It was just like they flipped the script and they changed the game. So it was just crazy. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So that's,
and at any point, did you accidentally believe them a little bit? At any point where you like, maybe they are right. Like maybe it's not tithing, or were you checked out, you were done at that point?
No, I was done. Yeah, I was like, this is bullshit. I mean, I think it was the fact that I was making my own decision to give money to people that I thought needed it instead. I mean, so I think I'd started to find a little bit of independence from all of this.
They weren't able to skim off the top of anything.
No. Yeah. And that's exactly it. I said, I'm not going to put somebody through that humiliating process of having to ask for money. No. It was horrible. No, but going back to before college, when we talk about like the difference between the way, like, the men and women were treated. There was one gal in my local congregation who had gotten pregnant, and her dad, who was equally as stern as my dad, because they were like really good friends. And she was a really nice gal. We just, recently reconnected on Facebook. She had this baby, but her dad made her marry this guy. He made her marry the guy who got her pregnant. And he was a bit of an abusive person, but he made her marry him. And it was like, oh, that poor girl. Oh, this is horrible, but we're not going to, but then on the other hand, there was this other young guy who was college age, and he had gone out to a bar on Friday night, gotten into a bar fight, left the bar, went back with a rifle, and got arrested. And they're like, oh my God, we have to pray for him. He's going to go to prison. Oh, this poor man, we have to pray for him. I'm like, so he made a horrible decision, but we need to pray for him that he's safe in prison, so he doesn't get, whatever. I mean, he was a good-looking kid, so I guess I need to pray for his safety. But they're like, we need to pray for him. I'm like, why don't we say, let's pray for her, or let's take care of her, or give her the same amount of attention? And they would always give these updates on him, how he's doing well, and he's doing that. And here's this poor gal with a baby, off on her own, married to this guy that I don't think she really wanted to be married to, but her dad made her because, if you're going to have sex with him, you might as well marry him. So, yeah, but I think there's just this difference in the way that,
the way they put the blame on those two situations. Because my first thought when you told me about the other pregnant girl is I was like, I wonder how they're treating the baby's dad. Like, probably
he was from her high school. He wasn't in the church. So he wasn't even part of it. She ended up actually, that gal ended up, she married a gentleman who was older. So she was probably in her mid-20s, and her child was, God, I've been 6 or 7. And this guy was about 15 years older than her, ended up marrying him. And I asked her, I said, hey, I was like, you're like going to be happy, like doing this, I ran into her and she said, he is a good person and he accepts me for who I am. And she, and he basically convinced her to leave the church and doing way better, right? I very once in a while will see her randomly around town over all these years. And, they had a great life and, still have a great life. Yet, she had to go through that. But it's the difference, right? And like, here's this young gal who's pregnant, this guy, he's like, I'm going to get a gun and go shoot somebody in a bar. It's the way they treat him. It's like I go to, congregation where I was cream of the crop, and now I'm curdled milk. And I can't coach boys volleyball. I can't date outside the church. But this guy who has no college degree, no special cream of the crop training, is allowed to date a divorcee with kids who's not in the church. And so there was also different rules depending on your gender.
You were either an actual criminal or treated like a criminal.
Yes, exactly. But if you were an actual criminal, we will pray for you and save you, right? So yeah, it was just, so it's just, and so you just see these things. So I quit. I quit, and they tried, about a year or so, they would try calling me and, hey, I just want to let you know, like, we have a snow day. We're not having church. I'm like, you haven't seen me in 2 years. Like, why are you calling me? Well, you're still on our call list. We want to check and make sure you're okay in case you want to come back. No, I don't want to come back. I surfed around. I tried to go to a bunch of, some other churches. I tried to find, because I felt like having grown up where there was this kind of this structure that I needed to do that. So I remember I went to a Jehovah's Witness church for a while, and it was somewhat comfortable because it was somewhat familiar about the structure, right? There was something kind of comfortable about that. And then I was like, this is messed up.
And then later you're very alarmed when you look back and you're like, oh, I should not have been pleased by that level of familiarity.
But I didn't get hooked in it. I didn't get hooked on it, so I was like, okay. And I went to, I found one congregation I went to for about a year, not all the time, but it was just a non-denominational Christian church. The pastor was great. He actually was pastor. His name was Pastor Ron Mell. He was a very loving man. So it was the third time I got baptized, because I was a baptized Catholic. Then I was baptized, in a Worldwide Church of God. And there's just something in me that just said, I just feel like you need to get baptized, just like in a real way. And this, and actually services were fun to go to. They were enjoyable. They weren't these 2-hour browbeatings about how horrible, like the music was great and that kind of thing. And so, but eventually I was like, do I really need to go to church? Because I was like, do I need an organized structure to tell me what to do? Because then I was interpreting the Bible on my own. I'm like, I think I know the 10 Commandments well enough, and I'm not going to kill somebody, steal, do all that stuff.
You've been triple baptized at this point, so I think
like,
you're pretty much hell-proof. I think
I have my halo's got diamonds on it. It's just, but I went through all that, and I was like, I think I'm doing, I'm doing good things in the world. I'm nice to people. I'm, giving money where I can. So I got to the point where I'm like, I don't know that I need to have an organized religion. So I just quit even looking. And I think some people ask if I miss it, and I don't. So I think that's the big thing too, is I don't miss it. So
do you consider yourself religious or spiritual in any way now, or agnostic?
Spiritual. I won't say I'm religious, but I'm spiritual. I think things happen for a reason. I do. And I think whatever people believe, like I have friends who believe in Buddhism, and I think there's some really beautiful things that come out of Buddhism. Growing up in a Jewish community, I learned a lot about, their faith is different. It's a lot of historical based. And there's a lot of really beautiful things about it. And there's actually in my, there was a community center I used to play sand volleyball at on Saturdays on the Sabbath. And there was a synagogue nearby. And after I'd finished, playing, I'd go and I'd, grab a Slurpee at the 7-Eleven, and I just kind of sit on a bench, and just kind of just take some things in. And I would always watch, because the Jewish people, they would walk by, because they would walk to and from, and there was just something so serene about them.
Totally.
And I always thought, God, if I were to go back, I would maybe consider going back to be Jewish or Catholic, because Catholics are also a lot of really fun people. But, but I just thought if I was going to go back, but I just love the serenity and how just, there's something about it. But but no, I don't. Yeah, I never considered going back. I don't, just I think I'm a good person. I don't know that I need a church to tell me I'm a good person or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
I think that always the big challenge, the thing my dad would always hold over our head is the fifth commandment: you're supposed to honor your mother and father. And that always did eat at me though. But it did because that was such a thing. And I was like, I'm not honoring them. I'm not honoring them. And I must be horrible. And that battle. And then it was, I don't know, about, 10. Well, okay. So I get out of the church. And I did PTSD therapy. I did a lot of therapy, but I still didn't really have a good foundation for adulthood and careerhood. And the one thing my sister did do, and I can't stand her, but the one thing she did do was she introduced me to life coaching, and she connected me with somebody. And I'm still coaching with this gal to this day, just about everything, because I knew I'd be like this weird, awkward, and I'm still still feel like I'm 11 years old, like in this corporate world. But she really helped me to coach me through things. So if I stumbled, I'm like, help me out. Here's what happened. So we went through that whole process, and I did the therapy, and I think that helped me to feel a little bit more comfortable about how to be successful, because there's some awkward, it's awkward out there, and it's hard to shed that. But I remember, so after going through that for about 10, 15 years, and it was about 15 years ago, so we talk about honoring your mother and father, and it still always kind of bothered me, because I was just like, God, did I really let somebody down? And somebody said to me, they said, this is totally out of the blue. I had done a presentation, and they said, and they'd seen me help some people. I'm in HR, and they just, the way I did it and handled it, I guess I did a really good job. But I'm going to browbeat myself the whole time, because that's how I'm used to browbeating myself, because that's how I grew up. But anyway, they said I did a really good job. And they said, your parents must be really, really proud of you. You've done so many good things, and just look at where you're at. And I was like, so I am honoring my father and mother. If people think, for as difficult and as challenging as my parents were, that I'm this good person because of the impact from my parents, then I guess that's honoring them. If that's, if I'm representing them and that's what they think, then I must be doing something right.
Or maybe you're doing very good things despite your parents.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Or doing opposite what they did, right? I'm going to do something different. So yeah, I don't know. It's been a really interesting challenge. So, God, I don't know. I could go on and on. I mean, there's so many stories to tell.
What have been some of the hardest things you've experienced since leaving the church, and what have been some of the best things that have happened to you since leaving the church?
I think the hardest was, so there was a period of time after I left and going into my 30s, I did feel lost. I felt lost. I wasn't good at holding a job. I think I got fired from like 3 or 4 jobs. I didn't know what I wanted to be. So I go to college, I get a degree in theology. I didn't know what I wanted to be. That didn't help. Trying to figure out, because I had friends who were on these great paths, even friends who graduated college with me, they had parents who helped set them up and do this, and I didn't. So I didn't have that base and foundation. So that was a challenge. Some of the people that I relied on to help me with my foundation ended up turning against you, or like disappointing. And so that made it really challenging. So there was a long time where I didn't have this footing underneath me. And it was probably going into my 30s where I was still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I landed, getting into the human resources field, which everybody said, oh, your sister does that, so you did it like your sister. I'm like, no, I'm doing it like me. My sister is a stuffy person, and I'm not. I'm so open. And so, I work in a fairly rough industry, and I just get people and I understand them. I'll share my stories, and, I'm open to doing that. So I think that's probably the best thing about it, is I'm willing to share, and I'm going to tell you, here's my authentic self. And I had this really weird slice of what happened in my world, but I think the things that I've learned from it have translated to every other person. I had a couple weeks ago, we have a couple of biker gangs in Portland, and there's some biker guys who work at my work, and this big ass biker dude comes in my office. He's like, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. He bursts into tears and he's having this breakdown. And I'm sitting here, I'm like shocked. I'm like, the last person I ever thought would be in my office crying. But I'm like, okay. But like, I helped him. I'm not a licensed therapist, but he's telling me all this stuff. And let's talk about resources. And I understand how you feel. And I said, I grew up in a different way than you did. And I said, but I get that. And I understand that. He's like, yeah, but I grew up. And I said, no, my parents were equally assholes in different ways, but the impact's the same, right? And I said, but you're a parent and you've got kids, so you got to make some decisions for your kids, right? So here's what I can encourage you to do. And let's talk, and now he checks in with me and would never say hi to me or anything. Would never. I'd see him every day. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, how are you doing? Everybody, hey, how are you doing? And I think that's the thing is, so because I had like this oddball experience that nobody really knows about, but you learn so much for how to understand people and
so
how to
much.
accept them. Yeah, it's crazy.
So, do you ever find, this has been my experience, but I'm curious if it was yours. Do you ever find that even though, the church teaches like love everybody, act like you want to represent God in like a good way, yada, yada. Do you ever feel like you are actually a lot more tolerable and interested in other people since leaving the church than since being a part of the church? Or tolerant, I guess I should say.
And I think it depends on what it's about. There's some things I can be tolerant about. One thing I have absolutely no tolerance for is if you lie, cheat, and steal. You're dead to me. There's my Italian, dead to me. You're dead. Yeah. I mean, but I think as far as concern for other people, yes. I think, yes, I've got a lot more tolerance around that. So here's the interesting thing. And I was talking to one of my girlfriends about this. And it's so funny. Like I have a blood sister. I call her a relative. In Italian, and we call it, she's a relative because you're a family by loyalty. You're a relative by blood. She's a relative. She's not loyal. But I have, these gals that I've played volleyball with who are like sisters to me. And so I have this really good friend, and we play sand doubles together, and we have the best of times, the worst of times. And I mean, we don't see each other all the time, but every day we have these great conversations, and I can have these conversations. And so I was having this conversation with her. So we have another friend who, I don't know, about 3 years ago, was a she with a female name and said, hey, listen, I'm a they, and now it has a gender neutral name. Which for me, I'm like, if you have found something that this makes you comfortable, that's awesome. If you feel you are being your true, authentic self, that's awesome. I support it. And I said, I'm going to ask you for a little bit of grace. I've known you for 15 plus years as she and as, your female name. I said, occasionally I'm going to slip. And I said, I'm going to really work hard. But please give me some forgiveness if I accidentally say she or whatever. And this person has, subbed on some of my volleyball teams. And, I'll be like, hey, let's go, ladies. And they'll look at me and go, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. Hey, let's go, team, right? But I'm going to try. So this person then last year, we were all hanging out at the big annual volleyball tournament we all go to. It's this big beach volleyball tournament. And, at this time, it's about 2 years. I've been really making an effort to understand and celebrate this person, that they are finally comfortable. And I've watched their life feels like it's so much more settled. And we were having this conversation, and my good friend who I play with made a comment to me about, hey, like the cult thing and this person who I've given all this grace to was like, that cult thing, it's just fake. I don't know why people believe it. I don't know how you could get sucked into this and all that. And so I lost tolerance, and I lost, I'm like, I gave you all this grace, and there was no going the other way. Right. And I was just, and this person is now, I would call them an acquaintance. I wouldn't call them a friend anymore. But my other girlfriend, she's like a sister. She was kind of like, hey, like, whoa, like, what do you mean? And like, it wasn't her choice to get in this. She was like for, and people in there, and they just make all this up. And I'm like, do you not watch all the shows? Do you not watch Leah Remini and her Scientology show? That shit is real. I mean, do you not watch all this Nexium stuff? That stuff is real. I mean, these people are branded and this, whatever they believe, and so, but that was the thing. So that's where I think some of my tolerance changed. Not that I'm not happy for where this person is at and that they have found their authentic self. I think it was more that it wasn't reciprocated.
Right. Well, and like in that moment, you didn't become a transphobe. You just lost tolerance for that individual's personality. It's, it's not like because of that, that's like your villain era and now you're a transphobe. I think there's a big, big difference between it being intolerant and not tolerating somebody's personality. Like being intolerant, you don't seem like a racist person. You don't seem like a bigoted person. And that to me is totally different than treating an individual the way that they treat you. It doesn't matter if you're a he, a she, a they. If you are disrespectful towards me, I will not honor you with my presence or my attention anymore.
Yeah, I think it was, for me, it was dismissive, like where I had finally found a point where I was comfortable talking about it, because you just didn't. I was comfortable just as this person was comfortable saying, this is who I am.
Yes.
And I think that was the part is, give me the grace of the fact that I found this spot where I'm comfortable, where I can accept this and I can share this. And hopefully it explains a little bit about me, right? And maybe why why some of these things happen. There are still old messages that come up, in your head. You'll never get rid of all of them. You can do counseling and therapy, coaching, you do all of that. But these are things that, become your foundation, and you can make them better. But it was really interesting. So, I wasn't intolerant towards what this person had become, but it was the fact that you couldn't give me the grace of having
that
this
shocked
thing.
me. I was shocked. Like,
it was.
You
it
would
was
think
really.
Of if anybody would understand and want to talk more about it, because it's one thing to not understand, to be like, how do you get involved in that? It's another thing to be like, it's your fault if you get involved in that. It's not a real thing. That's totally different. I'm sure a lot of people are incredibly curious and like have no idea what to even ask first.
Yeah. But well, it's so funny because you asked about my dad. Well, after his whole this whole Catholic faith structure fell apart on him because his brothers left the priesthood, he went searching. And he found this dynamic person who, like, just, it appealed to my dad's sense of intellect, that this guy, and that he had to be in an ego and all of that stuff, right? So it's, and so, yeah, that's how people get into it, or they're lost, or they're wandering. So many ways they get into it. It's really amazing. But, I'm like, I was 4 or 5. I didn't have a say in the matter. So don't ask me how I got into it. I went by proxy that, my family got into it. So,
right. Yeah, that's just wild, that disrespect. I was like shocked when you said that. I thought you were going to say they stood up for you or something.
Oh God, no.
And so if you had a message, because, we were talking earlier about how there are lots of very vocal people who have left Worldwide Church of God. But I know from experience and from the comments and things that I get through this podcast that there are probably 10 times as many people who never say anything, who never speak out, who never tell their story. Very similar to what you were saying, how it took you so long to come out and say anything about it. What advice would you give somebody like that who's listening to this and like living vicariously through you through this episode, to just encourage them to move on and what to do next?
That's a great question. That's a hard one too, because I mean, like for me, like my 30s were really rough. By the time I hit my 40s, it was kind of like the wandering in the wilderness. I was coming out of the wilderness. For me, when I turned 40 is when I was like, hey, fuck this. I'm going to just be myself, and I'm going to be my authentic self. It's hard for people. I think it's hard. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do it. And I think that's the thing where people are scared, and it's hard to not be scared to make those decisions. It was hard to go and talk about it at therapy because of the trauma and some of the abuses that I went through. I mean, I would, God, if you find a safe place, I just think you got to start by testing the waters. You got to find the right safe place. I don't even know where to find that. You know, we have one of our little local newspapers, and there's this gal who's a therapist for people leaving the Children of God Church, and
Wow.
yeah, and she lives like somewhere in my neighborhood, and I want to just connect with her and say, how can I support? I know I'm not from Children of God, but you know, there's so many things similar. I guess it's hard to know who to trust. And I think that's the thing too. Because for me, there were a few times I trusted the wrong people.
Yes.
Trying to. And I think it's hard to know who to trust. That's a great question. I'd have to really think on that more. But, you know, I think, you know, my one girlfriend that I've played ball with for years, just, you know, she and her husband are really great people. And I think there was part of it was my instinct was just saying, hey, I feel safe. And you know, we talk about gut instinct and that kind of thing. And I do believe that, you know, God does give us good gut instincts, especially women, because we're the weaker sex and all that stuff, but it keeps us out of trouble. Like when you're, I shouldn't do that. But my gut instinct was that I could trust her. And just to be able to start sharing some things with her.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then kind of gauge the reaction. So it was kind of dip my toe in the water, see how she'd react or respond to it. If I sensed that she was going to scoff at it, it was like, okay, probably not, you know, kind of thing. And I think that's part of it. That's a really great question. I think because, you know, my path is a little different, but you got to find.
And I feel like everyone's path is probably going to be a little bit different. But I like that advice to like find somebody you can trust, and also like don't be afraid to part ways with people if you discover that you can't trust them.
Exactly. It might be, and you know, like there's nothing wrong with therapy. I love therapy. And I would probably recommend, hey, if you feel like you want to test the waters, pay a therapist or a paid best friend, and they can't tell your secrets to anybody unless you're threatening to blow up a building or kill somebody.
Right.
But that's why I'm like, just pay them and test the conversation with them. Maybe have somebody help you, you know, find, you know, but there are the groups out there. Maybe find a group, you know, maybe go look and see, you know, I came across this group. It's interesting because so many of like people that I know from college, you know, so many folks. There's one gal on there who we were in college. We graduated the same year. We ran in the same circle of friends. You know, she was probably the second level friend. We were in the same circle, but you know, I could hang out with her. We could talk. And I see some of the things she posts, and I'm like, I had no idea, because I always thought she was so pulled together at college. She just seemed so pulled together, and she's just a really great gal. She's got a great husband, and she posts some things, and I'm like, I never knew you went through that. You know, and she has responded to some of the things I've posted, and she messaged me one time, and she's like, one of these days, you and I need to get together for a beer and have a conversation, because I just thought, like, she's so pulled together. There's no way she went through any of the stuff I did. I always felt like I was this weird kid. Yeah, right. And it's really hard because now I'm, you know, 54. You know, I show up.
No way, really?
Yeah. I'll be my speed limit birthday is in October. I'll be 55. But I show up at work, and, you know, I go to these meetings with, you know, the execs at work and all that. I feel like an 11-year-old still. I feel like this dumb, stupid kid. Like I want to say something stupid.
Imposter syndrome never goes away.
It never does. It never does. But it's so funny because I compare, like, my sister. She when we were still talking, so when she had her 40th birthday, she's older than me, so she's 2 years older than me. I went to visit her at her home, and she was so like panicked. She had, you know, everybody over to her house, and she did this birthday event at her house. And, you know, she had some people from her work and other friends, people I didn't know, but she was so embarrassed by me. It was so weird. She tried to keep me in check. She had kept all her skeletons in the closet. She had this persona, right? And here I was outside this persona. So I show up, and at one point I kind of dodge her, ditch her, and, you know, I'm engaging. I am talking to people. I talk to strangers at the grocery store. I mean, that's just me. You know, and I do dumb shit. I do this dumbest, funniest shit, which is why I so resonate with Ricky Velez wanting to clothesline an old lady. But I'm talking to this friend of hers, and we're laughing and we're having just normal conversation. It was nothing telling. I'm not spilling family secrets. We're just talking about whatever in general. And we're laughing. And my sister comes up with this panicked look. And her friend says to her, "Oh my God, you didn't tell me that you had a sister who was so funny. How come you're not as funny as your sister?" And it was the funniest thing. I was like, whoa. Yeah, it was so really interesting. And so so that's just like the difference. She is the keep up with the Joneses kind of person. I got to keep up with the Joneses, and I got to, and I have to have, and yeah, it's just totally, totally, I don't know, it's bizarre, it's different.
Well, and I really liked what you said about how you were you were entering your 40s when you really started to say, like, I'm done with this, yada
Yeah,
yada. Because I spoke to somebody recently, another guest, and he talked in depth about how he felt utterly ridiculous for being in it as long as he was. And I think he was
yeah,
in his mid 30s when he ended
yeah.
up deconstructing.
Mhm.
He might even have been 40, but he kept talking about, I wasted so much time. I wasted so much time. I feel like such a fool. But I tried to explain to him, I was like, it is so much more common than you think for
Yeah,
people to really not truly find themselves until they're in their 40s, 50s, sometimes 60s. And like
yeah,
that's
absent this stuff, right?
right,
Yeah,
right, and it's like that whole sunk cost fallacy, so many people are like, "Well, I've already been in 40 years, whether it's a marriage or a religion or whatever, like, might as well stick around," where you're like and I told him, I said, "You got out after 40 years, aren't you glad you didn't get out after 45 years?
yeah,
43
yeah.
years?"
Well,
And
it's so
so
funny because, like, I talked to my coach, and it's so funny. She's great, because I'll be like, "Okay, I need to work through this thing that happened at work," and there was an interaction. I'm not sure I responded well, and she'll be like, "Remember 15 years ago there was that jerk at work?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." She remembers that, and we were talking, and I'm like, "God, can you believe that we have been?" She's been working with me for almost 25 years now,
wow.
that we've been coaching together, and she knows me really well. And I love her because she gets me. She used to be in the field of HR. She's Italian, so she gets my emotional outbursts. She just gets that, and it's great. And I said, "I've got to tell you," I go, "I must probably be the worst client that you have." And she's like, "No, there are so many others who haven't gone through my cult stuff." She said, "No, there are so many others." And I said, "Do we ever get past this?" And I said, "Do we actually ever get past any of this stuff?" And she's like, "Some people do, some don't. Some learn how to live with it." So regardless of your background, and I said, I'm in my mid 50s and I still feel this way. It's just, I have clients in their 60s and they're still feeling this way. And I'm like, okay, so it's not just me because of this culture. So it's not me. I think it's just anywhere, right?
Yeah,
We have whatever our experiences are from however. And she's like, "I have people who come from really great families, seemingly so, and great backgrounds, but there's something that's happened and they need to help somebody realign them and work with them." And you would think, based on their upbringing or whatever, they'd have all of these, these head starts, based on, before what you had. But nope, they go backwards just as well. So it's not, so it's really interesting. So it's not just that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's still people in their 60s going through things
yeah.
like this and not even tied to being these weird, weird experiences. You
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Yeah, I remember when I was living in Chicago, I asked a friend of mine who was a cop. I said, "What neighborhood has the most crime?" I was like, "Who do you get the most calls from?" And he said, "Every single neighborhood has the same amount of crime. The crime just changes." He said,
yeah,
"Everybody gets the same amount of calls, but it might be in one neighborhood, old rich white men beating up their 20-year-old wives, and then in the next neighborhood
yeah,
it's robbery, and then the next neighborhood it's vandalism." And I feel that way about people. People are always like, "Well, I grew up so normal. Like, why am I feeling this way?" Or I grew, I or like we talked about earlier, my cult wasn't as bad as everybody else's cult. Why do I still
yeah,
feel? Because you got everybody's got issues. We like
yeah.
you can't invalidate your experiences just because you happen to be aware of an individual whose experiences might have been different or worse than
And
yours.
well, I mean, I look even inside my family. There was 8 kids. So the youngest was untouchable because of, his condition. So nothing ever happened to him. but from the oldest down to the seventh, we were all treated differently. And my abuses were different. And I know that my sister had her own abuses that she suffered. I didn't know exactly what they were, didn't always see them, but hers were different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tried to share what some of mine were, she's like, no, not at all. That's not the case. No, not at all. My oldest brother doesn't want to believe anything that happened to me happened. And the only time he's contacted me, so my mom passed away last spring, last year. And he called me just to say, hey, just, letting you know this happened. There was actually some estate stuff that actually surprised me a little bit. But, he cracked a little bit. And, he made a comment. He said, listen, he told me, he said, you chose to separate yourself from the family. He said, you chose to do that. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there. I said, I don't know what story you were told, but I will tell you exactly about the day that dad disowned me.
Yeah.
I said, so I was disowned. I don't know what story you were told, but I was told I wasn't welcome back in the family. And I said, so I'm going to have you walk that statement back. I said, if you and I want to try to have a relationship, and he was always my favorite brother growing up, and I'd like to have a relationship. But I said, if we are going to have a relationship, then at some point you're going to have to listen to me tell you the things that I went through. And I know that you feel you've put them behind and you've blocked them and you don't want to deal with them. But until you can acknowledge that these things happened to me, I can't have a relationship with you. I appreciate that. And he will still keep me informed of things going on with my family. If there are things that happen. So, when my mom passed and there was the estate stuff with my youngest brother, there were some concerns about, hey, how do we keep him set up? Because he, has, medical and stuff and, a caregiver and all that. And, and by being named in the state, I was part of some of those decisions. I'm like, hey, when we get those decisions about our youngest brother, please reach out to me and involve me. I'm concerned about him, cared about him. If we, need money to donate, I'll give, some of, I'll, give money to help, make sure he's cared for. But until, so that's going to be the extent of our relationship until he is willing to sit and listen and acknowledge there's no relationship there. And I told him that. And I said, just to be fair, I said, so I'm not sure what they told you, but they disowned me. I didn't make this decision to leave. I didn't make the decision.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it was interesting. Interesting. I really like his wife. It's so funny because his wife grew up in our congregation with us. And her little sister, who's a year younger than me, like we were really good friends growing up. We were in college together. We're friends on Facebook, but, here, she's got the same nieces and nephews I do. And, she's got a relationship with them and, and I don't.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Are they still pretty religious or did they change denominations that you know of?
So I don't think they go to church. I think my oldest brother reads the Bible. He still has something. He reads the
Like
Bible.
spiritual, but not religious.
He's spiritual. His wife is like, whatever. And which is so funny because she's great. I mean, I really like her. And, and I've never met in person my nieces and nephew from, I've never met his nieces and nephew. My next oldest brother, he was really vocal. He fell away. He's just an idiot. My third oldest brother, he and his wife don't really believe, but they have their own weird issues going on as well. So, but again, they're all equally hateful because my dad filled them with hate and discontent. So there's no hope. My fourth oldest brother, I don't know which group he belongs to, but I understand he keeps bags packed by the door in case the tribulation comes and they need to flee to a place of safety. So they still have that going on for them. My sister doesn't believe in anything but keeping up with the Joneses. My brother, who's younger than me, he still believes. He went with, I want to say, the Philadelphia Church of God, which is one of the stricter from what Worldwide was. So there's various levels of what they believe in. So yeah, it's really
interesting.
Yeah. So, the brothers, they still get together. And, my sister still, I just don't have the desire to do it. So,
yeah. Well, Marie, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I want to be respectful of your time. I realize I kept you way
Yeah,
longer than I said I
no,
would. I
yeah,
was just
I told you I could talk
intrigued.
forever.
Yeah, and I could let you. I'm so intrigued. But I just wanted to say that I really really appreciate your story, your experiences, your
Yeah,
advice, your just everything that you've been through. I feel like people people need to understand that their experiences, especially like, primarily we were talking about religion, but their experiences are valid and they're not alone in those
yeah,
experiences. And I think you are a perfect example of there is life after those experiences. You are a prime example of your world's not going to fall apart if you lose your connection to your family. Your world isn't going to fall apart if you lose your church. It's like there is a life after that. We view those things as like the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. Like, oh my God, I lost my
yeah.
family. It's like, well, guess what? You can pick your family. And it sounds like you've picked a family.
And it's not, and it wasn't easy, right? It was not
Right. No,
easy
of
going through it.
course.
And
Yeah.
there were struggles and there were times like, oh, how am I going to make it through this?
Yeah.
There
Of
was,
course.
all of that. And it is scary. It was really scary feeling alone sometimes,
Sure.
or that you found a resource you thought you could trust and then they didn't really, they weren't really trustworthy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I think though learning that it's okay to walk away. Like I said, this person recently, I don't, at some point I want to have a conversation with them and just say, hey, I just
Yeah.
want to tell you the impact that this had. I don't know when it'll happen.
Yeah.
But I want to have that conversation. It'll be one of those where I'll like, the time's right to have the conversation. But I think that's the thing too, is finding the people to trust. And it's hard to trust. I think that's really the hard part, is finding the people to trust after, you have your parents you're supposed to rely on and they let you down, or broke that trust. I shouldn't say let you down. They broke the trust. Something happened, right? And I think that's part of it. And it's not easy to do.
No.
Like I said, therapy has been great. Like I said, the paid best friend for those people who want to, start having those conversations. That's a safe place to do it. It
Yeah.
really is. And there's a lot of resources out there as well. So yeah, you know, for a while, I was also really scared, or concerned about coming out and just saying, "Hey, here's what happened." I'll tell funny stories all day long. I mean, if you want to sign up again, I can tell you about the Ruth Boaz. I can tell you about foot washing. I can tell you all sorts
Oh
of
yeah.
just other
I'm
weird
already
shit.
like planning future episodes in my head because I feel
Oh
like
God,
there's a
yeah.
million questions and
I'll be a
stories.
regular. Listen, you put me on regular. No, this is fun. I've actually had fun, and I
Good.
like the fact that you give this space and to have the conversations and you ask the questions enough to open up to have those, right? And
Yeah.
I like that you have that ability to create that comfortable space to do that. And it sounds like you've talked with a number of of the folks who are from the cult, the cult survivors of the worldwide, and I hope that they appreciate it as much as I do, and that there is something, I dare I say, a bit therapeutic about being able to have this conversation with somebody who can understand and acknowledge and go, "Hey, you're not crazy, and I'm
No.
just meeting you, and this is but you bring up interesting things, and so there is something that validates a little bit that I didn't go through all of this for nothing." I think
Right.
that's the thing, right?
Exactly.
We learn from everything. It's not comfortable. And, I have a degree in theology, and I was like, how did you get a degree in theology and you work in HR? And I'm like, if you really study the degree of theology and you look at the Bible, it's about human nature and change. And that's what it is. That's what HR is, right? Look at all
True.
the different
Yeah.
human nature out there, the selfish, all of that stuff, and my ego to be king and whatever, right? And change is continuously changing. Israelites living Egypt, and well, we got to leave, and now we're miserable 40 years. This is horrible. We're eating crap food, and now we want to go do this, and I want a gold idol, but no, I can't have a gold idol. Like all of that, right? It's people and change. And I think that's why I think HR was kind of an easy field to get into. And if I can't fix people and their human nature, I can pray for their souls, I guess, and
There
I'll
you
lay
go.
hands on them and cast out their devils, their demons. But I think that's the thing, is there's always something to learn from it. And I think
Totally.
it translates to so many different, so many scenarios, the learnings of it. But it's human
Totally.
nature and change. And that's really what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And the experiences we go through, there's ways that we deal with them, right? Like
Yeah.
you translate yours into a successful HR career. I translate mine into a podcast where I talk to other people about their problems because
Yeah.
one, I'm super nosy. Two, I love talking to people about their story. Somebody asked me once, they're like, "That's a good question." And I'm like, "I'm just the nosiest person, you know. I'm
It's
literally
like
just
being Andy Cohen on The Real Housewives, Watch What
literally
Happens
though."
Live, right? I
Literally
love
though,
that.
I get the tea every day from
Yes.
all these people about people I don't know, and I live for it. And I
Yeah,
live for it.
exactly, exactly.
Um, and some people take those experiences and translate them into writing or public speaking or going the complete opposite way and pretending it never happened, which is
Yeah,
also valid. But yeah, I'm super grateful for people like you out here willing to talk to me and talk
yeah,
to the audience and just share your story unapologetically. And I really think that people are going to listen to this story and they're gonna feel hopeful because
and be
there's a
like, "What a
lot of
wackadoodle she is." No, she's a nut
they're like,
job.
she's whack.
She is whack.